Good evening, my name is Alicia Krapko and I'm on the board of Task Force on the Americas. We are proud to be organizing this event with Veterans for Peace, and we want to thank them for let us share their space. Particularly thank to Paul Cox, who have been working very close with us to organize this event. We hope to have a respectful conversation tonight to learn from each other. We may not agree in all the issues, but one thing we are certain, all of us here tonight want peace in Nicaragua.
My name is Rick Sterling, and I'm also on the board of Task Force on the Americas, so I'm also a member of Veterans for Peace, and we're really happy to be doing this program. It began actually when we read an article by Camilo Mejia that he published about 6 weeks ago, I believe, and that started the process rolling where we decided we needed to bring another voice that's much less heard. And we're looking forward tonight to a presentation of a voice that video and facts and information that many of us have not heard before. So, Task Force on the Americas has been active since 1985. We have led delegations to all the countries of Central America, as well as Haiti, as well as numerous countries in South America. So this is a deep concern to us as well.
So the other experience that DFA has, that back in February, we supported a tour of people that were coming from the Asociación de Trabajadores del Campo, from an organization that is part of La Vía Campesina in Nicaragua, and friends of the ATC, who came to the Bay Area and did a series of presentations. We went there, organized help, did interviews in radio stations with them. And they were talking about how they were making progress in the sustainable development area in Nicaragua, and they talked about how safe the country was. And all of us were shocked when we started watching the news of what was going on in Nicaragua, because we were not expecting that to happen. There have been activities in the Bay Area, we are aware of activities in the Bay Area organized for those who have a different view or a different perspective. And we know that there have been demonstrations, cultural events, etc. And we respect that very much. Some of us participated in some of the cultural events, but we feel that we also have the right to have our own. And having said that, we have communicating with some people that ask us if they can have their voice being heard here, and we agree. And Camilo was the one actually that agreed as a speaker. We consult with him to have somebody else presenting from 5 to 8 minutes, and then we will have a lot of time for questions. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to pass cards for people to write questions, and then Camilo will answer as many as he can, possible with the time. Our organization, do not view Nicaragua as an isolated country, but as part of the Latin American and Caribbean region of nations under attack by U.S. imperialism for the crime of determining their own future, including developing regional integration without the influence of the United States. We respect the sovereignty of all Latin American countries, and in the case of Nicaragua, we believe that it's the people of Nicaragua the one that have to resolve these problems, their own destiny. It's not going to come from abroad, it's not going to come from us, it's not going to come from Europe, definitely it's not going to come from the United States. It's up to the Nicaraguan people. Many of us here in this room know each other well for other struggles, and we know that we share a lot of our views. We don't agree in this. Again, I wanted to reiterate that I'm certain that we all want peace for Nicaragua. So we are going to introduce now Amy Bank. Amy is a U.S. citizen and longtime feminist and activist who got involved in the anti-intervention solidarity movement in the early 80s. She moved to Nicaragua in 1985 and has lived and worked there since then, going back and forth between the Bay Area and Managua, focusing in gender-based violence prevention and women and youth rights. Welcome, Amy.
A lot of people are from my generation, it looks like. And maybe I'm even one of the youngers. I'm 59. And I have a feeling that there's a lot of people who are my age or older.
We have a bunch more people coming in. If people could move towards the center so we can fill up the outer chairs, and we're going to try to bring some more chairs in. Apologize, we underestimated how many folks were here, so thank you. Sorry, start over.
This is all good. Oh, I get another 30 seconds, I guess. So who's going to be, you're going to be giving me my time things? Okay. So just a very quick show of hands. How many people here are actually Nicaraguans? Nicaraguans. It's a pretty good amount of Nicaraguans. Okay. Have been in the solidarity movement and the anti-intervention movement since either the 70s or at least the 80s. Okay, so we got a good mix of folks here. And how many people are much newer to all of this and haven't been involved since until right now or something? Okay, a couple of people. In any case, I do believe, as Alicia said, that all of us want, that there's a lot of things that we do agree on. But the situation, the current situation, has become quite difficult and has polarized a lot of the community, not only here in Nicaragua, friends and families that are torn apart. That was the case in the 70s during the insurrection. It was the case during the 80s, and it's still happening. And I was trying to think of the way that this all worked is that we asked to have some minutes. They gave us 8 minutes, and then Camilo's going to talk. So I was trying to figure out, okay, well, what can I get done in 8 minutes, knowing that he's going to, in fact, present a lot of information and videos, which I'm sure are going to be very compelling. And I was trying to think, okay, so what can I talk about here that will bridge some of the things that we don't agree with. I think that the things that we do agree on, at least from the group that I have been working with since all of this started, we call ourselves autoconvocadex, to not be either autoconvocados or autoconvocadas, but autoconvocadex, and it's Nicaraguans and U.S. People who have lived or worked in Nicaragua for a long time. And what I guess what Rick said was that there's one view that's mostly getting out in the media, and that I guess what you're saying is that the government view or the support for the FSLN and Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo is getting out less in, I don't know what press, because I am reading all kinds of stuff on both sides, right? So it seems like there's an equal number of articles and interviews and stuff coming out, especially since Daniel Ortega has started giving more interviews very recently. I think that one of the things that we have to figure out is that since we all do agree, I am against U.S. intervention. That's 5, that means that I have 5 left, right? Okay. And against U.S. intervention, people to decide it, and I believe that what has happened since April is an incredibly powerful example of the Nicaraguan people rising up to say, we don't want this to be the way that it is anymore. What happened in April did not start in April. And for those of you who have been in the Solidarity Movement, and I who moved there, I've been involved in the Solidarity Movement, but I moved there in 1985, saw what was going on. I was incredibly supportive of the revolution. I worked for an FSLN organization in Nicaragua, and then worked for the government. I worked with Camilo's uncle and came on tours with him here for the anniversary of Luis Enrique, the anniversary of the revolution. But at a certain point, it started as a critical thinker, as a feminist, as a person who thinks that not the means don't always justify, or the ends don't always justify the means. I began to have a lot of questions, and things started going not exactly right. We have some flyers. I don't have time, especially as I see these minute things going up and showing that I'm going to get cut off, that this has been a long time coming. And I believe that the repression that happened, that began to happen towards the feminists, towards the peasant movement with the canal, the students, etc., that was the beginning of things, and it exploded when there was the repression in April. And that, Danielle began to lose the people, and the people lost their fear and came out into the streets. I believe in any case, and this is my feeling, that Daniel no longer represented the revolution. He represented a family dynasty that was controlling power, controlling the government, and that although there are many, and I'm sure that Camilo is going to talk about all of the wonderful things of the economic development, the stability, all of those fantastic things. It was not exactly that way, but there's a lot of really good things. There are also a lot of really bad things. And you have to be connected. NGOs that were not connected to the Frente had problems. Feminists who were not connected to the Frente had problems. There were lots of problems with democratic space, and there were lots of problems with elections. I'm not going to go through all of that because it would take forever. I do want to say, though, that the repression that started happening, the government is armed. The people are not armed. They had Molotov cocktails and morteros and barricades. Now, there's an insurrection. Obviously, things got out of hand. I'm sure he's going to show all kinds of things of what happened in barricades and people, some people getting harassed at the barricades, etc. There's an armed government repressing protesters. And there is now people saying, bashed in and her arm broken. The second day, my daughter's high school friend had his eye blown out by police that aimed the rubber bullet gun at his face. My son's friend was one of the ones who has now gotten himself back out to Miami. He was tortured, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need. Daniel, in the dialogue, said, let's get rid of the tranques. He's gotten rid of the tranques. There is now the Operación Limpieza, the cleanup thing, is now going door to door, finding everybody who was in opposition and rounding them up, arbitrary detentions. People are getting in prison, they are getting tortured. There is a mass exodus. Anybody who can send their kids to the United States or to any other country is doing that because being a young person is in danger. There's a mass exodus to Costa Rica to ask for asylum, thousands and thousands. We need all of that to stop and then to go back to the dialogue because this thing, it is not a right-wing U.S. coup. All of my friends, colleagues, they're all leftists. They supported the revolution. They fought with Daniel Ortega in the old days. They are with the revolution, their lives are in danger because of that dissidence. I know that I'm on time, and we will, I guess, have to talk about it. This is not going to get talked about in 8 minutes. I just want to say one last thing, is that this is going to go on for a long time. And one of the things that I think that we are all going to agree upon is that no matter what happens and how this plays out, and I really do hope that there is a peaceful solution, there has to be. There's the other side, the uprising is not armed. When this all gets figured out, there has to be a long process of reconstruction and reconciliation. And there is a lot of mistrust, there are a lot of insults, there's a lot of resentment, and we're going to have to work it out. We're going to have to work it out among ourselves. We're going to have to work together to support Nicaragua, and the people in Nicaragua are going to have to do it too.
Thank you everyone for being here. I'm very humbled by the amount of people who have come, particularly from Nicaragua and from the Nicaragua Solidarity Movement from back in the 70s and the 80s. I want to let you all know that as a Nicaraguan, many of you who are here, not only those of you who were born in the country, but also those of you who have done a lot of work there, that I appreciate you coming here and that we have one common cause, and that is peace in Nicaragua. I respect your views. I believe that there's a lot more that we have in common that sets us apart. But I want to let you know that I respect your views, and I believe that up until this point, the vast majority of the media reports that we have heard coming to us about Nicaragua have been very one-sided when it has come to basically the entire machinery of corporate Western media. I'm talking about New York Times, I'm talking about the BBC, I'm talking about the very same corporate media newspapers that have been paving the way for regime change interventions throughout the world, are the same ones that are basically promoting this narrative. And so I thought it would be important to bring a different perspective. The other thing I want to say is that I don't work for the government of Nicaragua. I never have. I do not receive any money. I'm not affiliated in any way with that government. I'm here to speak for my country. I'm here to speak against what I believe to be a soft coup operation happening in Nicaragua to overthrow the government of Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo. So I think it's important for there to be enough space for people to hear a different perspective, and which is why I did not agree to give Amy equal time, because I believe that there's enough of the other narrative out there, and I think it's important to balance the act a little bit. I also want to invite you to not believe anything that I say. I invite you to keep an open mind and to just listen. Because everything I have to say to you has not been provided to me by the Nicaraguan government, but is the result of my own research. And everything is out there. Every single piece of information that I will give you tonight, you can go home and you can check for yourselves. And if you have more questions, you can always reach out to me, and I will make sure that you have the sources, and I will make sure that you have the information that you need. With that said, I also think it's really important to hear not only from people who have done tremendous solidarity work like Amy in Nicaragua, or people who are from Nicaragua, or people who one way or another have been affiliated with the country and who love the country, but I thought that it would also be really important to hear from somebody who is in Nicaragua. And this is a solidarity worker, an American citizen from the Bay Area, who is living right now in Nicaragua and who has put together a testimony to share with us tonight. His name is Niels McCune, and we're going to give him about 4 or 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Niels McCune. Hi to the Bay Area. I'm from the Bay Area. So much love. Good to see all of you. I hope it's a great evening tonight with Camilo Mejia. What an honor. I wanted to just check in with everybody and do a thought experiment. I want to imagine with all of you what you might think if armed right-wing militias supported by a foreign power took over the streets we live. Wouldn't allow you to get to work, the city that they closed off, they started to burn the homes of known leftists, to force people to flee, to go underground, and to start to kidnap people, to take them to these roadblocks, torture them, strip them naked, paint them, sometimes kill them, sometimes burn them, and in other ways to prevent a normal life from occurring, right? To prevent merchants from being able to sell their wares, to prevent farmers from getting to farmers markets, to prevent people from getting to stores or to see their loved ones. That is what we've lived through in Nicaragua. It's an opposition here that, despite the fact that in the United States it's managed as though it were a leftist opposition, the reality is it's a far-right opposition, and everywhere in Nicaragua it's a far-right opposition. And it's a known opposition. It's a small opposition, but it's well known. In this case, they have hired gunmen around the country. Where I lived, the gunmen had AK-47 rifles. They had FAL rifles, which were it's a weapon of war that was used here in the 1980s. They had AR-15s. They had pistols. And they took over the streets. Not all the streets, but they took over the ends of town. I couldn't leave for 80 days. I was trapped. Much of that time I spent on this porch, trying to be useful, trying to figure out what to do, because it was extremely scary. My family members were listed on right-wing websites with their photo, with their names, with their political affiliation, right? Accused of being Sandinistas and threatened for being Sandinistas. So that's the reality that we've been living through. Sandinistas are not boogeymen. They're not terrible people. They're the people that built this country in some ways in the 1980s, right? With a lot of work, with a lot of difficulty, with contradictions, with a war. And they're the people that came back from the worst defeat, the only defeat where a revolutionary government, which came in to power through arms, gave up through the urns, right? Through the ballot box. They left power, and neoliberal governments took this country to hell for 16 years. Okay, that's not debatable, right? The Sandinista Front came back, okay? It's got problems. Every political party in the world has problems. Every government in the world has problems. But this government is very popular. It's the vast majority of Nicaraguans who voted for it in 2016. And those Nicaraguans want this government to stay in office until 2021, when the next elections are called for, according to the National Constitution. In my opinion, those who want to change the rules and force out the Sandinista Front, whether it be by arms, whether it be by foreign interference and pressure, are supporting an imperial plan, right? And what is that imperial plan? The plan is no more leftism in Latin America. No country can be anything besides the straightforward neoliberal model in Latin America. They've been showing this in Venezuela. The script of the violence is the exact same as in Venezuela. You have these young, slick protesters that speak to camera, and then you have extremely violent right-wing elements that work the streets. So we were captive 80 days here. We finally are free. We can go walk around. We can talk to our neighbors. We can give people hugs in the streets. We feel very joyous. But now the manipulation campaign has gone international. So please do not let yourself be fooled. Please come to Nicaragua, discover all the wonderful things about Nicaragua, the people here who are struggling to have a dignified life. And please listen closely tonight and enjoy your time in San Francisco.
Thank you.
Respectful and listen, please.
Nobody has to get out, just please.
Respectful silence. Shh, let him speak. Silence.
So, like I said, this is a different perspective from what people have been hearing in the United States. This person sent this video this afternoon to us. It was made last night. He has been there the entire time. And I think that the perspective that he offered is a perspective that has been completely kept from mainstream Western media. But this is easily verifiable. A lot of what's happened is that the other side of the story has not been promoted by anyone in the Western world. But it's basically out there in plain sight. If you are from Nicaragua and you are on social media and you are active on Twitter and you're active on Facebook, this is basically one of the mechanisms through which they are able to propel this type of regime change operation. And so all you have to do is check what the other side is saying. For every video that comes out about an atrocity, there's another video that follows with more context that basically disclaims what has been presented. And so a lot of these videos have been recorded by the perpetrators themselves in an effort to sow fear in the hearts, not only of Sandinistas, but in the hearts of people who dare to be critical of this opposition. So what I want to do is I want to show some of that other perspective through videos that have been circulating through social media as well. So we could play that.
donde son unas personas que están llenas de odio, de rencor, personas que son pagadas por la derecha golpista, ¿verdad? Donde fui baleado, fui azotado con alambre, fui con una tateaca, me dieron en el pecho, me dieron con palos, donde querían quebrarme los pies, donde querían quebrarme las manos, donde me enchucharon un pañuelo.
Why don't you show the other side of the head?
Cristo preciosa, que me lo mataron unos tranquistas, por eso, ¿verdad? Me arrebataron la vida a mi hijo un domingo 24 de julio, a 3 cuadras de mi casa, acabaron con la vida de mi hijo. No satisfechos ellos de lo que habían hecho conmigo, a los 10 días mataron a mi esposo. Al padre de mis hijos también lo asesinaron. horriblemente, porque esto todo lo han hecho por un odio que tienen a la familia, a toda la familia sandinista y a nuestra familia.
Se aparece el padre y me dice de que, okay, que está bien, que me va a ayudar, pero que se va a ir y que posteriormente va a regresar. De que lo primero que me pide, que tengo que entregarle la arma, que me rinda, que me van a matar. El padre, Juan José López Franco. Ya. Porque si no la entrego, que estoy rodeado como con 2.000 personas. Pues no mata más, padre, pero nada más no se la doy, y si me voy con mi arma.
Él dice que no se sienten seguros de dejar su arma. Yo le digo que esa arma la voy a tener yo, que esa arma la voy a tener yo, que esa arma la voy a tener yo.
Cristo murió por amor. Él en la cruz es la víctima inocente. Los que están alrededor de él son los verdugos.
Show the other side of the coin. Sapo. Sapo. Mentiroso. Sapo.
What you're doing right now
Pedófilo.
is you are manifesting the kind of democracy that you stand for. When somebody I really don't want anyone to be asked to leave. You will have a chance to make comments and ask questions at the end. We're trying to build a democracy in Nicaragua. A lot of the social upheaval and unrest is about the alleged lack of democracy in Nicaragua, the censorship, the intolerance, the inability to hear what the other side has to say, and that is precisely what you are displaying here tonight with your explosions and your outbursts. I ask you to wait. I ask you to wait until the end, and you will have an opportunity to express your views, to ask questions, and we will have a conversation. The longer we take doing this, the less time we're going to have at the end to have an open discussion.
It's fine.
I know that what we have seen right now is not what we're seeing through the mainstream media. This is not the version that we're getting from the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN. We're getting the opposite version. And so we are here to see something different at the end. Little known secret, I was actually in support of the protest in the beginning. I was active with a group.
Please, let him finish. Please, man, let's wait. Please. Respect, okay? Relax. We have time to speak to, all right?
Be calm. We will have a time.
And we have pictures. We don't have videos, but I do have pictures of the burned kids.
I was active with a group from my high school, and as a matter of principle, despite being Sandinista, I support people's right to protest. And I did not really understand what happened exactly with the reforms to the Social Security. And in the beginning, I wanted to support the Nicaraguan people and the student movement in their right to protest, including by making donations so that peasants could come and support the marches and some of the rallies that were taking place. The news that the Nicaraguan government was massacring people hit me just as hard as it hit anyone. I was in shock for a while. I did not turn against my Sandinista principles. I did not turn against the government, but I was very confused. And so I began to ask for the video and the photographic evidence. And I received a video of students who had been taken refuge inside of a university in Nicaragua that they had turned into a clinic to receive the people who were being shot by the police. And when I saw this video, it brought me back to a video I had seen of Syria. A video I had seen of President Bashar al-Assad having allegedly bombed the school. And when I saw that video about Syria, I saw that the narrative behind the video was that President Bashar al-Assad had used white phosphorus munitions to bomb the school. The first thing that I remember thinking about was that the site of the bombing did not look like a site of a bombing. It basically looked like somebody had thrown a grenade. I know this because of my military experience and because I had been to war. So I had the benefit of that perspective to be able to tell the difference between a grenade and tell the difference between a site that has been bombed. So that was the first red flag. We followed the camera crew in this alleged bombing of the school in Syria, and the first thing we see following the site of the bombing is a person speaking directly to the camera, addressing the international community, asking for more media outlets, asking for the international community and the UN to intervene, which was also pretty curious, given the fact that when you're in a situation like that, the last thing going through your mind is to call the UN. What you're trying to do is you're trying to help the wounded, you're trying to treat the people who have been bombed. The camera crew goes inside the clinic and we see the people who have been allegedly wounded and killed by this air raid by the Bashar al-Assad government, and the people basically react to the camera crew coming in, and they wake up and they start doing a sort of a thriller dance, basically made for camera. And this was the first thing that came to mind when I watched this video of Nicaragua, of Nicaraguan students basically receiving the students. There was no blood. There was absolutely, the atmosphere was not an atmosphere of people having been at a massacre. There was no sense of urgency. The person who was basically, filming this selfie video testimony was addressing once again the international community, human rights organizations, the media, and then asking for people to intervene to save the students. That's when I started questioning the narrative that was coming through mainstream news media to the United States, and I began to ask friends and family who are in Nicaragua to provide more evidence. As the evidence became available, I began to see basically a pattern of pictures and videos completely out of context, in which you see young people on the ground bleeding or dead, but you don't really see any context whatsoever. You don't really see people shooting at them. You don't see police officers. You don't see crowd control officers killing anybody.
Wow.
You see. So let's start with the reforms that led to the first protest. These were reforms made to the Social Security system in Nicaragua. I think it's worth noting that back during the first period of the Sandinista government, the Sandinista created a program, a retirement program, that was part of a reconciliation and consensus government that included pensions for people who had fought not only with the Sandinista military, but also with the Contra military. People who had died and left family behind, their relatives were also able to get a reduced pension from the Sandinistas. People who were not able to contribute enough into the Social Security system because the economy was shattered by the embargo and by the war, also received pensions. And so a lot of these benefits that were implemented by the Sandinista government were reversed during 16 years of neoliberal governments. Fast forward to 2017, and the International Monetary Fund is pressuring the Nicaraguan government basically to exclude all of those Nicaraguans who did not make contributions to the retirement system. We're talking about 53,000 of Nicaragua's poorest senior citizens who were being be excluded from the pension system. They also wanted to increase retirement age from 60 to 65 years. They wanted to increase the amount of contributions for people to be able to qualify to be eligible for retirement from 750 contributions to 1,500 contributions. The Sandinista government responded with a counter reform that basically rejected the increase in retirement age and kept it at 60. It also rejected the increase in amount of contributions that would be required for someone to be eligible for retirement. They made a transfer of 5% from the actual cash benefit into the health benefit, because in Nicaragua, the pension system includes medical treatment, includes medicine, includes treatment for chronic disease, even treatment overseas if the treatment is not available in the country. So in order to balance the deficit, the Sandinista government made a transfer of 5% of the retirement benefit into the Social Security benefit. And they also made an increase in contributions of 0.75% for every employee and 2.75% for every employer. The last thing that the Sandinista counter proposal included was to remove a tax ceiling that existed upon Nicaragua's high salaries, so that the people who are the wealthiest in Nicaragua would have to pay in accordance with their income. When this happened at the negotiating table in Nicaragua. There was a government of consensus that includes big private enterprise, that includes worker unions, and it includes the government. the very powerful business lobby known as COSEP, for Consejo Supremo de la Empresa Privada, they protested and they called the protest in the beginning. Mind you that, as I mentioned before, the Nicaraguan government operates via consensus, so they had already reached out to retirees, and retirees favored the government's counter-proposal to the IMF's proposal. So what we saw was basically not an uprising of retirees, but an uprising of students. This happened on April 18th. The news that a lot of people received was that a student had been murdered by the government. This was later proven by many, including the human rights organizations that are against the government. It was proven wrong, that nobody really died that day. But this news was used to springboard more and more intense protests that began on the next day, on April 19th. The people say that was, again, another case of the government ordering a massacre against students. 3 people were killed. Today, we know that those 3 people, this is in the Amnesty International report, which has not been favorable to the Nicaraguan government, that one of the people who was shot was a student. Another one was basically a pedestrian who had no involvement with any protest, and the third one was a police officer. All 3 of them were shot to death by high-caliber rifles from a long distance. And you can tell this by the trajectory, the angle, the bullet went in. And so this basically is a very important fact because it proves a couple of things. The first thing that it proves is that the dead, contrary to what's being portrayed, are not all students and they're not all opposition members. And it also proves that from the very beginning, from the very 3 deaths that took place, the deaths were on not only the Sandinista side, the opposition side, but also people who were completely unrelated to the protest. What followed after that was more of this anger and more of this media manipulation to create this mirage that the government was out there basically massacring people because they hated students and because they're repressive and because they're a dictatorship. And so more deaths began to mount up, and reports continued to come out from Western media and from anti-government media about the government not only killing its own people, but also going out there on a rampage, burning down public buildings, burning down town halls, burning down artisan shops and things like that. So basically, the government had gone insane and killed its own people and burned down its own government buildings and killed its own government officials. A lot of the people that you saw on those videos are known Sandinistas. One of the men who was tied to a pole is a Sandinista mayor, and he was stripped naked and tied to a pole. Some of the other people who were tortured were members of the Sandinista youth, the ones who were painted in blue and white, and set free before they were fired at with a mortar weapon from behind. They are known Sandinistas. These are people who work for city halls, they work for government ministries, they have names, they have last names, they have positions in different government agencies. They are members of the Sandinista youth. And this is the main difference between a lot of the people who have been killed and who have been tortured, for which we have plenty of evidence, and for which we have names, last names, job titles, and positions. I promised you that everything I said, you would verify on your own. So when you look at the death, you look at the reports that have been produced by these human rights organizations, who, by the way, in their entirety, are financed with US and European money. In fact, one of those human rights agencies, known as one of these human rights organizations, the Asociación Nicaragüense Pro Derechos Humanos, was an organization that was founded by the Reagan administration in 1983 to be embedded with the Contra military to whitewash Contra atrocities. These people who are operating today in Nicaragua are leading the charge against the Sandinista government, and they are the ones who are publishing these reports, basically monopolizing death to create a political tool to create more hatred against the Sandinista government. So I invite you to take this list and do not listen to what I'm saying to you right now, but go home and check this, because all of these lists are available. And so if you check this list, you're going to see that a lot of these names and a lot of these alleged deaths are repeated. Some of them provide no context whatsoever. A lot of them are people who have turned out alive. A lot of them are Sandinistas. A lot of them are police officers. Approximately 20% of the people who have been killed, at opposition events. For instance, these tanques or these roadblocks that were set up were highly armed people, were meeting police, heavily armed, and died as a result of confrontations with police officers that included police officers being killed and members of the opposition as well being killed. We're going to take questions later. This is all verifiable. Once again, this is not information that I came up with on my own. You can go and check the list, you can go and check the names. There are reports out there that are basically being amended because there are studies of these reports that are being published that are challenging the veracity of a lot of these reports. This is all available. The people who have been allegedly killed because of their political beliefs or their political affiliation, there's absolutely no evidence to prove that they were killed because of their political affiliation. So, what do we have? I talked about having a regime change operation in Nicaragua, and I'm going to back that up as well. Why do I say that there is a regime change operation happening in Nicaragua? Let's get out of Nicaragua for a few minutes. And let's talk a little bit about the United States. About the United States back in the 60s, the United States back in the 70s, the United States back in the 80s. There was a huge scandal in the US government when it became known that the CIA had been involved in a series of assassinations and operations of regime change, coup d'etats, and things like that, that included not only the persecution of known peace activists, some of whom were active with organizations that are present in this room tonight, that were known to have been part of assassination attempts of heads of state, activists, people who were influencers through their art, their music, etc. And it forced the US government to launch a series of investigations on the activities of the CIA. The US government became the subject of many attacks and much criticism from everywhere in the world. And so something needed to happen because the United States government was not ready to drop its regime change operation, but could not continue to sustain it going on this way. And so what happened was that then CIA Director Bill Casey approached President Reagan and said, we need to have an organization that is going to do regime change for us that is not going to be directly connected to the US government. And this organization needs to have a clean name and needs to stand for something that nobody could oppose. And that organization, founded in 1983 to carry out the activities of the CIA, is called the National Endowment for Democracy. The National Endowment for Democracy has been behind regime change operations since its very founding. The National Endowment for Democracy was one of the main funders of human rights organizations that were doing the whitewashing of contra crimes. The National Endowment for Democracy was the organization that was funding La Prensa, which is the leading opposition newspaper in Nicaragua. The National Endowment for Democracy today is financing pretty much the entirety of the civil society atmosphere in Nicaragua that is leading the charge against the opposition. So what is this National Endowment for Democracy? It's basically an organization allegedly independent from the US government that receives a lot of money from the United States Agency for International Development. The first time that they were involved in a regime change operation was in communist Poland in the mid-80s. This was a time when Ronald Reagan was also making deals with one Karol Wojtyla, or the Pope John Paul II, to basically bring down communist regimes across the world. So they were involved in Poland along with another foundation called the Freedom House, which is an extreme right-wing organization that has also been involved in a lot of regime change operations. The Soros Foundation was very active at that time. The trade unions were working alongside these regime change nonprofits. And what they did was basically they did away with all of these subsidies that the government had, the price controls, the wealth of the nation. All the institutions, all the natural resources that belong to the state became privatized as a result of the operations of NED. Following the NED, their highly successful operation in Poland, they moved to Russia. This is during the Yeltsin years. The Yeltsin years were basically 100% CIA operation going on to basically ransack the wealth of Russia. Using their puppet President Boris Yeltsin, who basically sold the gold to the United States through a series of secret deals that involved a lot of these National Endowment for Democracy and affiliate agencies that were involved in this kind of regime change. How did they do that? How were they able to do that? These organizations went into the country and they started funding different organizations that were led by students. Why students? Because students are very easy to influence, because they're able-bodied, because they're very susceptible to symbology. They're very susceptible to messaging tactics. They're very susceptible to pretty much the entire array of tactics and techniques that are used to create a social explosion, to then snowball that into basically a regime change operation to overthrow a government that is not in line with the dictates of United States economic policy. Following Russia, and also during the Russia time, they also used their influence in the Philippines to overthrow the government of Ferdinand Franco, because he had found Japanese gold that had been hidden in the Philippines by the Japanese emperor. And so when the CIA realized that he was selling that gold and keeping it, they effected a regime change operation. They installed Corazon Aquino, who came from one of the Philippines' wealthiest families, to be able to set in motion another ransacking of the Philippines' wealth. Following that, the Soros Foundation, operating also with the National Endowment for Democracy, Freedom House, and other regime change nonprofits, started doing a lot of work. They were the ones behind the oust of Slobodan Milosevic as well. This was a time when the Red Scare had ended, the Soviet Union had disbanded, and there was no longer a need for an arms race, there was no longer a need for NATO, and European nations had decided that they wanted to have their own entity to protect themselves. And so there was a sense of urgency to create a need for another arms race and for another very robust US armed presence in Europe. And so basically they operated once again with a lot of nonprofits. This is the beginning of the Otpor movement that basically you can see, recognize the fist pretty much in every regime change operation throughout the world. Following that, Tiananmen Square in China. This was another regime change operation, financed basically by NED, Soros money, USAID, and Freedom House. In this case, it included the Albert Einstein Institute, which was led by the late Gene Sharp, famous political analyst and the creator of the soft glue formula. And so these people have been basically doing the exact same thing time and time and time again throughout the entire world. And so how are they able to get away with it? They're able to get away with it because their presence in the countries where they're effecting this regime change is tied to a facade of progressive activism, progressive movements. We're talking about equality movements, we're talking about education, we're talking about, in some cases, healthcare, reproductive rights, we're talking about LGBTQ issues, we're talking about feminist organizations, We're talking about the reintegration of young gang members into society. And so, who do we have right now in Nicaragua? These organizations that have led the charge against Nicaragua are financed by the very same organizations that have financed regime change in all of these places. And I only gave you a partial list. The list goes on, and I see you going like this, hurry up, get to it. Why do I understand this? Because I have been following regime change for a long time, and because I see its application in Nicaragua, clear as daylight. And so, what we have in Nicaragua right now is a student movement that has been trained on social media, that has been trained on messaging, that has been trained to make symbols and messages go viral through the web, and that has the full support of Western media and the entire machinery of United States regime change agencies. So what do we have in Nicaragua? We have the National Endowment for Democracy has funded upwards of $4.2 million worth of NGO work between 2014 and 2017. We have the international, the United States Agency for International Development invested approximately $5 million in Nicaragua, basically in quote-unquote pro-democracy activities. Same formula, exact same application of everything they have done throughout the world, same Western media, corporate outlets, basically validating everything that's said by the opposition. And what we have is, a facade of a student movement that was brought to the United States to meet with the far-right legislators in the United States, people like Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, who has called for the rearming of the Contras. Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, who has called for the NICA Act. Like I said, you can verify this, and I will send you all the information. If you don't believe me, and I ask you, don't believe me. But she has advocated for a rearming of the Contras. She, along with Senator Rubio and Senator Ted Cruz and Mike Pence and Donald Trump and USA, basically have called for the NICA Act. And so what we have basically is a return to the 80s. We have another embargo in the works, and we have another armed insurrection leading up to more direct military intervention. That's what we have happening in Nicaragua right now. Who brought the students to the United States to meet with all of these politicians? Freedom House. The same people who are active in China, the same people who are active in Poland, the same people who funded the Albert Einstein Institute, this is the Gene Sharp Institute, that are now operating in Nicaragua, funding the media, that's feeding the corporate media, all the news that we're hearing here, funding the human rights organizations that are inflating these numbers of the dead, monopolizing death, basically counting everybody who has been killed, or who has died of a heart attack, or who has died of suicide, or who has died as the result of armed robbery. Check the reports. Everyone who is here can check the information. Everything that I have told you, you can check, okay? And so, what has followed these regime change operations? Extreme poverty, the ransacking of the natural resources of every government that has been the subject of regime change, the destruction of social nets of support for the poorest of the country, the destruction of subsidies. So people would like to dismiss the progress of the Nicaraguan economy. So now let's talk about the uprising. We're going to be here much longer if you keep doing it.
I think we're gonna stay with the agenda. we've got a lot of questions here. We're going to go through as many as possible. And Camilo has a website, and people can look that up and can email him afterward, or you can talk with him after the event. We actually need to be wrapped up here in half an hour. So what we'd like to do...
I'm going to let Aura speak for 1 minute.
Okay.
To address that.
Well, I haven't been living in this country for 59 years. I gave all my life to the effort to give freedom to Nicaragua. In 1979, all embraced a hope for a truly change for the people. All of us did. What had happened? What had happened with those dreams? Gone to the drain. At this moment, Nicaragua, under Ortega's government, has produced more than 240 multi-millionaires. Okay? That's right. And he kept it, and he kept all that money for himself and his family and his associates. We saw the clip, okay, of the people, that the guy being burned, and he said that it was a Sandinista, one of the army's member. Let me tell you this. When Bill Stewart got killed by the Somoza's guards, Somoza and all the press internationally said were the Sandinistas who had killed Bill Stewart. And you remember, finally, the clip from the filming guy showed the truth. The National Guard, Somoza's guards, were the killers of Bill Stewart. Same thing happening with this clip that we saw with the burning and killing of the martyrs, what he claimed.